everyone. I'm Beth Sullenberger, President of Women's City Club of Cincinnati, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our second forum on affordable housing. Tonight, we will hear perspectives on the Charter Amendment to fund the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Women's City Club is a century-old nonpartisan organization that initiates community conversations, educates people on local issues, and moves citizens to action for the common good. I want to thank our program committee, particularly Jeff Dye, Sarah Gideon, Susan Noonan, David Siders, and Rena Saperstein for organizing it and getting the word out. As we heard at our forum last month, Cincinnati's lower cost housing is aging and decreasing. Housing costs have increased steeply, and wages and jobs have not kept up with increasing child care, utility, and housing costs. Almost a third of Cincinnati families cannot afford their housing. Research estimates a gap of 28,000 units of housing within the city, with the gap growing every year. And as we have also heard, the private market cannot generate affordable housing without incentives and subsidies. Meanwhile, last year, over 90% of city tax incentives for housing went to develop housing for higher income households. In 2018, City Council established a trust fund to help leverage city investment in affordable housing. To begin to address community need, the Cincinnati Affordable Housing Trust Fund needs millions and an ongoing funding stream. The city initially allocated about $700,000 from the general fund. After that, designated regular funding sources have been suggested, but none have been approved. In response, a community-driven campaign led by the Greater Cincinnati Coalition for the Homeless, Affordable Housing Advocates, and the Metropolitan Area Religious Coalition of Cincinnati sponsored a local ballot initiative to require the city to fund the Housing Trust Fund. If passed in the May election, this charter amendment would require the city to invest $50 million a year in a fund to create and preserve affordable housing and prevent displacement. Be focused on very low income families and individuals earning less than $30,000 per year. The amendment describes a number of potential sources for the annual appropriation, which would increase at the rate of inflation. The amendment mandates a controlling board to manage the funds, which would be granted or loaned for new construction, renovation, and operation of affordable housing programs and services. Supporters estimate that the funding could generate 500 units of affordable housing per year. We have 4 speakers tonight with deep knowledge of the affordable housing crisis who will offer their various perspectives. David Siders, Women's City Club Vice President for Civic Engagement, will act as moderator tonight and introduce them. David?
Thanks so much, Beth, and welcome everybody to our event this evening. I'm so glad you're all here with us to hear from our speakers this evening, and we'll have time to discuss. I'll introduce, here to speak with us tonight are 4 community activists who are all supporters of affordable housing, which I'll introduce now. Peg Fox is CEO of Metropolitan Area Religious Coalition of Cincinnati. Matt Strauss is Housing Policy Advocate of Community Action Agency. Dot Christensen is Retired Director of Better Housing League. And Kathy Schwab is recently retired from LISC, Local Initiatives Support Corporation. So we'll each allot 10 minutes for each speaker to speak on their perspectives. And then we'll go into move into a time of response from each of our speakers. And then around 7:45, we'll have an open discussion.
Well, I'll send you the link.
Right.
All right, without further ado, Peg, welcome.
Thanks, David. I would like to start out, and is Matt Strauss on the call?
I am here. I am looking to share our slides, if that's all right with everybody.
Oh, there we go.
And
There we go. Okay.
hang on.
As was given in the outline, we're looking for a solution to Cincinnati's housing crisis. And I would like to give some background on how we got where we are today. So the Affordable Housing Advocates created a Affordable Housing Trust Fund Committee in 2017. And that committee was co-chaired by Josh Spring of the Homeless Coalition, and the Homeless Coalition is a member of Affordable Housing Advocates, as is Mark, and Noam Hurwitz Prince of LISC. So Josh and Noam co-chaired that committee. That committee met for about a year and a half, looked at models, researched what affordable housing trust funds looked like, researched on the need, based the need on the Housing Institute study that was done by Xavier Community Building Institute, along with LISC. So the 26,000, 28,000 are units that are missing, affordable units that are missing in the city of Cincinnati. And so following that, recommendations were made. One, which was to create an affordable housing trust fund, which hadn't been created yet. So the Affordable Housing Advocates, of which Mark was one of several, others were Housing Opportunities Made Equal, Caracol, as I mentioned, LISC, and a variety of other organizations, Interfaith Hospitality Network, Easter Seals, even CMHA, Cincinnati Metropolitan Housing Authority. So what we did is advocates took the idea of an ordinance first to Yvette Simpson, who held committee meetings on that, and then left once she when she lost the mayoral election. Then it went to David Mann, City Council member David Mann. And Councilmember Mann sponsored the Affordable Housing Trust Fund ordinance, which passed in December of 2018. Now, that just created a fund to receive money. It didn't guarantee any funding with it. So along what we picked up on, we, meaning the housing advocates, was there's an oversight board that is important to have in that ordinance, and also where the sources of funding are going to come. So City Council preferred just to create this ordinance first before the other steps. So we waited a couple years for those other steps, which never happened. And the advocates got together and created an Affordable Housing Trust Fund committee, and then made a decision to ask the people of Cincinnati to determine the funding that we would need in order to go forward. So as was said earlier, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund in the future, we hope, would annually have $50 million. The Community Oversight Board is made up of 11 people who would be appointed, who would be nominated from a variety of groups, and they would include an attorney, developer from a community development corporation, The council member pro tem would have 2 appointments. One would be a person who experienced homelessness. There is room on the board of 11 for a representative from a foundation, and a variety of other appointments or nominations would be made. These nominations then would go to City Council for approval. And the other piece of how we, well, anyway, I'll let Matt get to that later. Okay, so within this structure, we would have half of the funds would be for people earning 30% of the Hamilton County average median income or below. The other half of the 50 million per year would go to households with income at or below 60% of the median income. So the average Hamilton County median income is $60,198. 30% of that is $18,059, and 60% is $36,119, and that is for a household. So as you can see, that isn't a lot of money for rent when the average rent at this point in time in Hamilton County for a 1-room apartment is $1,163 a month, and that's for 2 bedrooms. For 2 bedrooms, it's $1,505, and the average rent is $1,357. So you can see that folks that are at 60% or below, or 30% or below of the household average median income are going to be struggling just for a 1-bedroom apartment or a 2-bedroom apartment. So none of the occupations on this slide at this point in time can afford a $1,357 a month apartment. And as you can see, the list lists home health aides or cleaners or stockers or substitute teachers. In fact, one of our endorsements has come from the Cincinnati Federation of Teachers, and their president said, my teachers should be on that list because they can't afford $1,357 a month. So it just goes to the need of the lack of affordable housing in our city of Cincinnati. So Matt, did you want to take it from here?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Great.
So on to the nuts and bolts of the ordinance here, or rather the attempt at a charter amendment. The initial ordinance, as we had mentioned, left a lot of stuff undone. It had promised a funding stream and it had promised an oversight board, and none of that happened. And that's mandated in there, but there's been a lot of talk, but not a lot of action. And in order to get something meaningful, we thought it's time we went with the charter amendment idea because people talk about different funds, different sources, a little bit trickles in here and there. It's temporary. We move on to the next shiny idea. It's temporary. It's too small. We want to enshrine something meaningful to really hold their feet to the fire. We intentionally did not mandate in this ballot initiative where the funding will come from. We left that up to the city. A big misconception is that we are asking the city to carve $50 million out of their existing budget and wall it off just for housing. We are not asking them to get that out of their budget. If they want to, that's up to them. But if they want to create different funding sources, different revenue sources, that is just fine. And examples of sources like that would be an impact fee for development, just a small 2% maximum on developments over a certain size would help to fund this. And quite honestly, if I'm a developer, if I'm going to put in 2% for this, and it's going to open up $50 million of additions to capital stacks for future projects, it's a pretty good investment. We mentioned the railroad, that is out of the budget. They do use that money for discretionary funds. That brings about $17 to $18 million to the city. That's one suggestion. Again, they don't have to use it. We have, the one thing that we did stipulate is that you can't raise taxes to pay for this, mostly because we felt that voters would say, oh, we know what they're trying to do here. And that's not the way to go about it. So what we have seen is that when the city has something that they want to get done, they really think it's important to get done, they sure have found all kinds of ways to magically make the funding happen. And so we think affordable housing is in no way less worthy than any of these other wonderful ideas. The Community Oversight Board is something else that was neglected. It was required in the 2018 ordinance. It is not all that different from, actually, it's no different from many of the other city oversight boards. A few of them you see listed here: Park Board, Rec Commission, the Zoo, Hamilton County's Park Board. This really isn't all that different from that. They would be, as Peg mentioned, they would be nominated and City Council would approve the appointment. This is the list of which slots are available and who will be nominating them. And I'm sure if you're watching this on a phone, you can't read that, but it's on the ordinance. There had been some concern about, we've heard a few people say, well, shouldn't elected officials be making these decisions? And we're thinking, in this day and age, no, definitely not. And in fact, there aren't that many elected officials left on city council right now. So the thought that we're having developers go to council, this is a great idea to take it out of their hands when it comes to development decisions and put it into the hands of people who are on the front lines of providing housing for the lowest income folks in town. This is why we have actually people who have experienced homelessness on here. We have people who develop this with development corporations, charitable foundations, organizations who understand this. That every time that we trust this to a developer to say, hey, can you throw in some affordable housing too? Well, I don't even need to tell you, we just saw what happened with that. It's a nice idea. It never seems to come to fruition. So with this, with the use of funding, the idea behind this is that we should be able to make about 500 new or updated or preserved units a year. And as Peg mentioned, 50% of them have to go to people who are 30% or less of area median income. It has to be in perpetuity. It has to stay that way. Contractors will get a livable wage. There is, obviously, it's going to cost money to administer this, but no more than 5% of the funds will be allocated to administer it. And we are making sure that just cause evictions are the only types of evictions allowed here, because we're trying to keep people in housing. Some of the features, there are a lot of different things we can do. This isn't simply a way to subsidize developments. While there will be a lot of that to be done, we think this is probably the most effective method of providing more units. We want to preserve existing units, whether that's rehabbing or helping to subsidize something that is scheduled to no longer be affordable, and it's the commitment for that is run out. We're going to help with eviction prevention. We're going to help with more advantageous loans for low-income home owners, home buyers, a variety of different projects. This isn't just a construction project. And the project procurement, the board will consider the applications for funding. They will decide what does and doesn't get funded. They will also decide on the structure of administering and spending this. They can, more than likely, we expect that they will embed new staff, their staff within Department of Community and Economic Development. That they're already good at this. Why not doing it? But If they're finding that that's not effective, or if they want to do something parallel or a pilot program or something else, they have the flexibility to do that. We want to make sure that not only that, I mean, we all see, as we've seen, the market changes and they need to be able to adapt to that. In addition to providing all of these homes, we're also going to have a lot of jobs that come with that. There will be contractors, developers, architects, all these folks who are who come with the development process and with the maintenance process. They're going to suddenly have not just $50 million a year going into their line of work, but $50 million leveraging a whole lot more than that, many more projects that will bring in all kinds of not just construction jobs, but we are also making sure that the construction jobs are paying a decent wage. And there are also the safety benefits that come with this. There's this myth that affordable housing is bad for a neighborhood. We saw actually people trying to leverage that fear in the recent presidential campaign you might have been following. But there are also some really obvious but harder to quantify benefits. We understand that police and fire runs will surely go down. There'll be less burden on the building inspectors and the housing courts. And the health incomes are even harder to quantify, but there's no doubt that this is a very important component of this. Lead and mold will be reduced. This accidents from dilapidated conditions, different issues coming from landlords who aren't taking care of their place. If we had our housing inspectors who are spending time, who's spending less time on abandoned buildings because these buildings are being repurposed, then they can focus on other health issues. And this will also, it'll create generally safer living conditions, and this will be a lesser burden on the health department as well, and in various initiatives like that. And looking at this going, gee, how did I leave out the schools? There's such a big problem with kids bouncing from home to home, which means they're bouncing from school to school. And if they have this continuity, the benefits from that last a lifetime. I don't know how I'm doing on my 10 minutes here, but I think I've got everything. Unless, Peg, you have anything that I missed?
Well, I don't know about missed, but there are on the books 3,000 children who are homeless that attend Cincinnati public schools. That tends to be a conservative number. So this kind of housing, 30% below or 60% below the Hamilton County average median income, is very helpful in response to those kids. I also wanted to add that all of the people who live in Cincinnati who are working or who need affordable housing at 60% of the current Hamilton County average median income is 41%. That's 41%. I find that astonishing. And it only underscores the need for this charter amendment.
And the only other thing that I neglected to put in the slides that I would say, you recall from last month's presentation, Liz Bloom was referring to this issue as a math problem. And it really is. I have come from the neighborhood development side until recently and watched the subsidies. 20 years ago, it would take $25,000 to per unit to make something affordable for under 60% of area median income. I just did a project 2 years ago where we needed $75,000 to make something affordable for somebody above area median income. $50 million, people ask, why did you pick $50 million? Well, because $100 million was really the number that we should have chosen, but we thought that was just a little too much of a reach. $100 million a year will take care of the gap, or at least the gap that we had before the pandemic, would take care of that in 10 years. $50 million should take care of this, the affordable housing gap, take care of half of it in 10 years. So we're not even, in 10 years from now, we're only halfway there. So that's a big math problem. So with that, I will relinquish the floor and stop sharing.
Thank you, Peg. Thank you, Matt. We're doing well on time. We'll next hear from Dot and then Kathy for about the next 20 minutes. And as a reminder, after that, we'll have some time for each of our 4 speakers to kind of interact and respond to what we're sharing out tonight. Then again, time for open discussion. So thank you again, Peg and Matt, and welcome, Dot.
Thank you, David. I'm in a really uncomfortable position tonight. In the 1990s, I chaired Cincinnatians for affordable housing for about 3 years. And for 10 years, I was executive director of the Better Housing League that provided homeownership counseling for over 2,000 people a year, non-traditional home buyers. And we managed the Shuttlesworth Foundation Down Payment Assistance Program and established Ohio's first mortgage default prevention fund. I've been involved with affordable housing and fair housing in particular since 1970, when I first moved to Cincinnati. So I've been doing this for a long time. Currently, I am a 30-year board member of Family Housing Developers, Inc., which built and continues to manage 2 affordable housing projects. One is the Lewiston on Riverside Drive, right near the waterworks, and College Park in North College Hill. I've got many friends and former colleagues on this Zoom tonight, and they have worked so hard and long, and I really like a lot of the things that are in this Housing Trust Fund amendment. I just don't think it should be an amendment to the charter. My assignment is to balance the arguments in favor of it being an amendment with opposing arguments. It's been very difficult for me to oppose any parks levy or school levy or affordable housing initiative, but I do think that this is a great initiative, except it shouldn't be in the charter. And for this reason, I'm speaking against the amendment. I'm going to share my screen here, so I've got my arguments. Can you see that? The proposed Affordable Housing Trust Fund Charter Amendment, why not vote for it? Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. This amendment doesn't belong in the charter, which is our city's constitution. The Cincinnati Charter is a statement of the fundamental principles under which the city is organized and governed. The Affordable Housing Trust Fund was established as a function of the Department of Economic and Development by ordinance under the charter, and the trust fund is a policy statement and function assigned to the department by City Council. Principally, specific dollar amendments for any purpose should not be in any constitutional document, including Cincinnati's charter. The charter, as it should be, is difficult to amend, as you all know very well. And over time, community needs, elected officials, oversight boards, and availability of other funding changes. A specific dollar amount may no longer be appropriate. And it is as hard to amend and take something out of the charter as it is to put something in it. The second point is the impact on the city budget. And I got to figure out how to make this go down. The budget has not been structurally sound for many years now. And in order to make it balanced, they have to use extra funds and one-time funds and borrow from other funds to make the budget balance. We already borrowed much to make up for the annual deficit between income and expenses. It's been particularly bad this year and last year with the COVID-19 virus problem. This has produced additional strain on the city budget. This year, the city had to use nearly $49 million in one-time sources, mostly from the state's CARE Act, to balance it. They offered early retirement incentives to avoid more layoffs than they would otherwise have to make, and 250 employees took advantage of this. When you call City Hall today, you no longer get to talk to an operator or ask a question. You get a recording from the Public Service Department that asks for a detailed message, and someone will get back to you when they can. This is how strapped they are for having people. And I've read about the fire department doesn't have the full complement that they would like to have. There's an also upcoming question of somebody's going to go to court on the question of whether all employees who work at home but live outside the city will have to pay city earnings tax. The earnings tax makes up 70% of the city's total income, and it will be severely impacted if in fact the city loses that case in court. So that the impact of requiring $50 million to go into the Housing Trust Fund, regardless of source, will result in layoff of personnel, reduce or eliminate human services funding, delay bringing safety department equipment and other capital needs up to date, and much more. It turns out, in my thinking, that the Housing Trust Fund becomes an unfunded mandate. Currently, it does receive a few other TIF funds, but it's not enough. And the proposed amendment actually forbids raising taxes in order to cover the $50 million for the trust fund, which is a problem because I don't know where else they're going to get it. The suggested use of the lease money from the Southern Railroad, which is about $20 million a year, that money is already used for basic infrastructure and capital expenses. If they were to move that $20 million into the Housing Trust Fund, how are you going to pay for the bridge work and the road paving or whatever else needs to be done in a capital way? There's at least one proposal to dedicate the 0.3% reduction in the earnings tax that resulted from the county increase in sales tax, which is about $20 million a year, to go to the trust fund. And there's the current review panel introduced by David Mann, which is looking at development department processes and procedures. Their review, which is due in August, will address abatements and possible associated fees or incomes that could go to the trust fund. Thirdly, federal and state housing funds may not be used to fulfill the $50 million a year requirement. This is a little harder for me to understand. Housing assistance is the job of HUD, and more federal funds are very likely to be dedicated in the next few years compared to the last years. The advocates for affordable housing, formerly Cincinnatians for affordable housing, were very great and worked hard to they made housing a public purpose in Ohio in 1989 so that state funds could be used for housing. The federal and state funds should count for the desired $50 million a year income to the trust fund. Another concern is the proposed oversight committee. I think that the oversight committee is well thought of and well thought about, but under the amendment, as I've read it, although we haven't got the actual wording, the $50 million represents 1/6 of the total city budget. As proposed, the city manager, the mayor, and council are pretty much removed from oversight of the trust fund, except that city council would be approving nominations to the oversight board. The board would make final decisions on projects and directly authorize the department and city manager to write contracts, so that the city manager and mayor are involved, but council is not. Instead of the development department and city manager administering $50 million a year, direction would come from the oversight board made up of the representatives from social service and community development agencies, low-income homeowners and tenants, as Matt has already said. And the question is, how accountable is this if they're the ones that are directing the department to make decisions? I think there's very likely a legal issue whether a civil service employee from any department can be managed and directed by an outside volunteer board instead of the city manager. The park board, the health department, and every other board and commission, they are policy makers and functions, and they make directions and they make suggestions to the department heads and the city manager, but the final decision about whether something gets implemented is with city manager, and therefore he's working for the mayor and city council. And there is an inherent conflict of interest for oversight board members. If they're making the final decisions on where these projects are going and to which organizations, they are the very organizations who will be applying for the trust fund and to have contracts and loans from within the fund. Agency leadership, which is the oversight board, will change over time. Nonprofits do go out of business due to mismanagement, a simple lack of adequate funding, change in their mission or service area. How are these board vacancies to be filled? What if a named agency, which is named in the charter, goes out of business? Who fills that position? And there are huge changes in the political environment. I'm excited that just today or yesterday, they have now a new housing subcommittee on city council, and that things are changing a lot. Affordable housing has been identified and is well known to be a public health issue, particularly impacting the health and education of our children. Hamilton County is preparing a multi-year housing plan to be released in May. My question is, why doesn't the city have a multi-year plan? As was been suggested by AHA for years. Federal funding is likely to increase under the new HUD administration. There is the City of Cincinnati Consolidated 2020 Annual Action Plan, which seems to be sitting on the shelf, and it needs attention, and those goals should be updated. And then I heard there's something called a Housing Vision Report. I'm not even sure what it is, but could it be a blueprint to achieve at least some of the affordable housing goals? Cincinnati needs a 5- and 10-year plan and a tax increase for housing, such as the Preschool Promise has, or the Smale Commission for Infrastructure, bringing support from corporations, foundations, and nonprofits. So in conclusion, my problems, I really would like to see this amendment someplace else. It's a great policy issue. This amendment, but particularly the specific dollar amount and the oversight mechanism, doesn't belong in the charter. The city cannot afford this mandate without a significant tax increase, and the proposed amendment actually forbids increasing taxes for this purpose. State, federal, and local development funds must be integrated into an overall housing strategy, and the oversight board cannot operate separately from the city manager and council. My suggestion is to ask every candidate running for council where they stand on affordable housing and what they're going to do about it. Council can effectively implement a lot of this. 2 or 3 people on council already are doing things. John Michelle has put in a new ordinance just this last week, I understand. And the one thing I think part of the education process that we need to include about affordable housing is every single one of us that has a mortgage has subsidized housing. If you get a tax break for your mortgage interest, then you're being subsidized, and people who don't own houses or can't afford to own houses deserve a subsidy as well. Thank you. I think that's about the end of my list.
All right, and now we'll hear from Kathy Schwab.
How's that? Is that better?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
good.
Yes.
I turned off
Much
my,
better, thank you.
Wi-Fi. We're in Florida and we have very spotty Wi-Fi. So I turned it off and now I'm using my cellular. So hopefully this will be good. I'm so sorry, everybody. And I'm sorry I'm in Florida for all of you because I know you're having a really hard time. But this is what working for 40 years gives you, the ability to take off a month in the winter from Cincinnati. So I thank you for inviting me to this panel. This is near and dear to my heart. So even though I'm on vacation, Beth called and said I'm doing this panel. I really want to be able to convey at least alternatives that everyone should be aware of for how we can improve our housing affordability crisis here. I mean, there is really no question or debate that it's imperative that our public sector take the housing affordability crisis seriously. We need to force them to do this. There's no doubt about it. But they can do this with both policies and resources, and they can use the goals as Dot said earlier. We don't have a strategy, a blueprint, but we do. We have the Housing Our Future strategy. The city can follow that. They can follow the goals and the strategies very closely. Gap funding is a top priority, and we need gap funding to add units, to preserve the existing stock we have, and to protect our low-income renters and homeowners from displacement. But it's also really important to point out to this group that it's not just funding, there is a strong need for federal and local policies. Policies can do an awful lot to add units to our much count. I'm going to give you a couple examples. On the federal side, the Affordable Housing Credit Improvement Act of 2019, which was actually a bipartisan act that didn't go anywhere out of Congress, but it helps, it proposes to increase the housing tax credit by 50%. So sort of looking at this in perspective, over the last 10 years, Cincinnati or Hamilton County got maybe 2 to 6 development deals, low-income housing development deals or mixed housing development deals a year out of the low-income housing tax credits. If we were to keep up with six deals a year and this were doubled, that would double our production, like just with a policy issue. And this is really important because the low-income housing tax credits, they go to the greatest need that we have in our housing stock, and that is people that are less than 60% area median income. When we did the housing study in 2017, we found that those under 60% of area median income were up to 80% cost burden. So we need to find ways, and this is a huge way, and lobbying for this, this important congressional act, we should do this. We need to lobby our senators and congressmen. I mean, this is a big, policy is huge. Ask Sister Sally, she's the one that always pushed me for the last 10 years. Policy is so important. The second one is the Neighborhood Homes Improvement Act of 2019. If passed, this would actually formally establish a federal tax credit that would fuel rehabilitation of single-family homes, which would help in wealth building in low-income communities. And then locally, you know, I don't know if anybody touched on this because I missed the very, very beginning of this panel, but our citywide tax abatement, that is the single biggest thing the city can use. This is an incentive that this could incentivize developers to build affordable housing into every single development deal that is done in the city. And we don't use it that way. The city doesn't use it that way, as you all know. The city needs to build investment tools to incentivize both at the neighborhood level, citywide, and the county level. We clearly need to find a funding source for that affordable housing trust fund. Thank goodness that David Mann got that passed, and we have the trust fund. It's lowly funded, but this is not something the city can do alone. This is something that has to be done by the entire community. And by the entire community, I mean the healthcare community. I mean, housing is fundamental for the health of all of us. The insurance companies who fund healthcare, the faith-based communities, philanthropy, the banking community, and the corporate community. If we all banded together and got funding from all of these sources, we could do a public-private partnership with the city's money being the much needed grant money. And I'm going to give you a couple examples, and that's what I was actually asked to do tonight. So all around the country and very close to home, these conversations are happening. And here's some really great examples. Detroit, the mayor of Detroit committed $5 million. At the time, and now it seems like a drop in the bucket, but at the time when I heard this was several years ago, $5 million carved out of the block grant money, that's CDBG and home funds, dedicated to affordable housing, which then would leverage $250 million of private money. And that fund is called the Affordable Housing Leverage Fund. You can find that in the City of Detroit's website. This $250 million is going toward the preservation of 10,000 existing units and the development of 2,000 new units. Not enough, but it's the development of 2,000 new units. The Charlotte Housing Opportunity Fund. Charlotte, they have such a concentration of low-income housing in so few communities that philanthropy decided to put $50 million into doing affordable units all over the city so that people could have choices to move to other neighborhoods. And that fund raised $50 million very quickly. And what they do with the city money is they invested pari passu, meaning the city will do a NOFA or an announcement of funding with their money. And then philanthropy will come in with their part of their $50 million and an increased the number of affordable units significantly. Then there's Columbus. I'm sure you all know this, but the mayor proposed a $50 million bond issue go on the ballot, and it was passed. And that was to leverage $200 million in low interest bank debt, which they've raised. I'm not sure the $50 million bond issue ever got funded because COVID hit, but that takes leadership, and the mayor of Columbus really stepped out. I actually told John Cranley, do you know the mayor of Columbus? And he said, yes, I do. I said, you need to call him because you need to understand what they're doing in Columbus. And then I just have two other little examples. If you really want to target affordable home ownership to help low-income families build wealth, Kansas City has a great program that is a public-private partnership. They're using some city money and a lot of private capital. And Newark, the city of Newark dedicated $3 million a year of their money, which is a lot for Newark, and that then leveraged enough private dollars to tackle their vacant properties, which are turning into affordable home ownership. So, I mean, there are these examples all over the country. And I just want to close by saying that don't underestimate how we can all affect policy change in our community and in our government. We need to step up. This is such a critical issue all over the country. And it isn't just we can't depend on just the city alone because we have the county and we have all these other resources. So we have to look at the entire community funding affordable housing. Thank you.
All right, and now we've allotted time for our four speakers to respond to each other. If you would like to interact.
Well, I think everybody is in favor of everything that's in the Housing Trust Fund Amendment. The question in my mind is simply that it doesn't really belong in the charter, and that leaves the major responsibility with the city. As Kathy said, it needs to be more. Right now, we are not going to be able to work with the county because they're not going to give money to the city. And we've got lots of shared services that should happen and don't have anything like Metro government, which might come in the years in the future, but it's not around for now. But Kathy's absolutely right. There are lots of programs in other cities that we could replicate. And there's also really fine organization and support from everybody who's worked on the Housing Trust Fund Amendment. I just don't think it should be in the charter.
Yeah, what we've seen, I agree that this is not the only way to do this. We're only tackling half of the problem and taking 10 years to do it. And so I would love to see some of these other initiatives, a lot of what Kathy mentioned, why aren't we doing what some of these other cities are doing? And one of the reasons we have chosen to attack this problem in such a, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but in such a decisive manner is that nobody's doing that. We're tired of, hey, I got an idea. Okay, that's great. That's $100,000 idea right there. I'm talking at the city, and I think leverage would be absolutely fantastic. And I think that's what this, what the trust fund does, is it leverages a bunch of other projects, brings new development to the table, but yeah, I do agree that there are a number of different ways to approach this, and this is just one, and one that's very decisive.
Well, I'd like to respond to why a charter amendment. Resolutions, as everybody knows, they normally don't have much teeth. And the ordinance route can always be changed. The reason we selected the charter amendment is for the very reasons Dot gave why she's opposing it. So it's because it takes a long time to change it. And, this may be kind of a far out comparison, but I am so thrilled that our US Constitution has amendments. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to vote, Dot.
That's true.
So I just want to respond to, in the chat, Susan mentioned that philanthropy for many years hasn't stepped up. And let me explain why. One, they're waiting for the city and the county to step up. They're waiting for, because they, like, a lot of them feel like this is a public sector problem. But I think over the years, we have shown through a number of ways that this is not just, this is a community-wide problem, and now it's a national. So I think that one of the reasons is they want the city to step up. And number two, like what I've heard from like Greater Cincinnati Foundation and Bethesda Inc., two large foundations that I spoke to a couple years ago about raising money for this, is that they want to know what the strategy is. Like where are we going to put this money? So we spent, like there's a whole group of us out there, including Matt and Peg and everybody. We spent 18 months putting together a housing strategy. It's called Housing Our Future. We have a blueprint. We have step-by-step. Here's what the city can do. Here's what philanthropy can do. So we did that because of philanthropy. We did that so we can hand this to the banks and say, here's what we need to fund. Here are the huge areas, gap areas. So we have that document. I feel like now what we need is the city to carve out their money, whether it's 50 million or 5 million or 10 million. At this point, I don't care. Just carve it out and say, we're going to use this, and that will leverage the private dollars, which are so important for low interest debt and long-term patient capital, which is what you need with affordable housing, as well as philanthropy, who will then also put in grant money. But it needs to be a public-private partnership, and everybody needs to be on the same page.
All right, thanks to those who dropped links to other resources for us to think about in the chat. And our four speakers, any other thoughts before we move to questions and open conversation? All right. And Janet's asking, are there any examples of public-private affordable housing developments in Cincinnati?
Oof.
Anything? There's got to be at least one, right? Tell me there's at least one.
Yeah, see, that's why we need this amendment.
There's a project.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. There's a project that I've heard about, and I'm new to all of this, so you have to excuse my naivete. But Price Hill Will has some sort of a program where a person buys a piece of property, and the person I know who has done this is a single mom with 2 kids. Her monthly payment, I believe she said, was like $236 or $364. It's not over $400 a month. Whatever group sponsors this provides the funding, and as long as she makes those payments for 5 years, the property is then turned over to her, and it is hers. I don't know what that program is called. I actually live in North College Hill, but I'm an active Ascension with St. Catherine Parish in Westwood. We're the largest neighborhood with the largest percentage of Section 8 housing. And we see the need for affordable housing every time we answer a phone.
So there are quite a few small examples of public-private partnerships. Homesteading is one where they get money from the city's NOFA, and they have to raise private philanthropic and bank dollars for that. There's Habitat for Humanity, as Beth pointed out. There's a few, but they don't yield a lot, and there's no cohesive. Homesteading is a wonderful program, and that the city should have embraced that and should have put a lot of dollars towards it, because if the city had put more than maybe $100,000 toward it, they could have raised so much more in private dollars, and they could have done more than maybe 20 houses in the last 2 years. So there are examples, but they're not big examples.
And really, the money, I started the program, not the homesteading program, but started the buy, improve, sell program at Price Hill Will. And we churned out a lot of houses in a very short amount of time. And we did it because we had government money going into it, and because we also had a lot of help from Kathy Schwab. And Lisk did a ton for us to make this stuff happen. But it took part of our best. The period of our best productivity was when during the housing the recession. There were millions of dollars coming from the government to deal with that, and we were able to just churn them out.
Yeah.
For those that added comments in the chat, would you like to elaborate or ask questions?
I have a question, David, if I can follow up on what we just were discussing. I understand, I've worked with enough high-end developers in Hyde Park who are seeking tax abatements to understand that these are not developers who are really at all interested in anything to do with affordable housing. And I feel like we're wasting our time trying to force them to do things. So is there a way, a policy way, that any of you who know way more than I do about this see to take tax abatements away from the high-end developers and only allow tax abatements, or mostly allow tax abatements for people who are doing affordable housing? Is that a policy? Could policy solve that? Is there a way to get to that?
Actually, the city of Columbus does it by a tiered system. So Hyde Park, Mount Lookout, Mount Adams would not be included in the tax abatement. So they try to use tax abatements to incentivize and to help lower income communities, not the Hyde Parks of the world. And this was raised multiple times around the city. We need to change our tax abatement policy, period.
So regarding that,
Just clarify, we're not asking for tax abatements for Hyde Park. In fact, the people of Hyde Park are thoroughly sick of tax abatements because they're ruining our community. We don't want to see our housing stock being torn down and replaced by, here's a street full of, and I know this is a first world problem, but here's a street of $500,000 houses, and somebody gets tax abatements and puts up a 1.2 million house. That is not good, but that isn't the question. What I'm saying is, from trying to work with these developers, I understand that they do not have a mindset that's ever going to make them willingly want to do things with affordable housing. So the bigger picture question I'm trying to ask is, can we somehow with policy make the city stop giving the abatements to the high-end developers and say, you want a tax abatement? This is the kind of development you have to do. Is that
Janet, I'd like to respond.
Yeah.
So we, at Mark, we recently listened to the roadmap to a more open community, which speaks to tax abatements for more modest homeowners or those that want to become new homeowners, and particularly for African Americans who have been radically left out of that whole policy. So we had Janice Jones from Housing Opportunities Made Equal, who is supporting this present, but Mark supported that statement in principle, but we also recommended a repeal of the current tax abatement policy, and that the city take a break for a year and bring in a variety of voices that would actually need the tax abatement, and really study that issue. The current committee that just made a recommendation regarding tax abatement does not favor folks that actually need it.
Exactly.
Right.
I mean,
So the policy hasn't really been created yet. And in order for a true policy that addresses those serious issues, it suggested that we repeal for 1 year and then focus on neighborhoods and individuals that actually, kind of crafted like Kathy was suggesting the Columbus model does. But it wouldn't be that difficult to do.
May I speak to this just for a minute? I'm Martha Hilliard, and I actually worked on a tax abatement program when I worked at the city of Cincinnati. And all you really have to do is change the ordinance. That's how I changed the program to begin with. And how it was structured then was it was capped. Like you didn't abate everything. You abated up to a certain percentage of property value, okay? So what we were trying to do at the time, which actually worked, was, develop more, keep people in the city. We were kind of falling apart and bringing more people downtown. I don't know how many developers I talked to, I would say, these manufactured buildings, you can make condos and you get a tax abatement, so I was really trying, these apartment buildings, you can make condos, you can bring housing downtown. So it has worked and it can be changed, just change the ordinance. And one of the things that I really think would make a difference is the inclusionary housing. Like every development that you do, you include low income people. And the tax credit programs really don't get at the lowest of the lowest income, because to make those projects work, the rents have to be higher. And so you really need to do something for the really low end of the totem pole, because HUD isn't doing it anymore. The funds have been cut year after year after year. So that's my little say for today.
I mean, what's going to incentivize, whether it's the tax abatements or anything else, what's going to incentivize a developer to switch from doing only high end to something mixed use or low end is how much money are they going to make on it?
Right,
Boom.
exactly.
And we know full well that the largest contributors to city council campaigns are developers.
Thank you for all the comments in the chat. So everyone, please be sure and take a look at those. I hope I'm not missing anyone out of order, but I think Kurt Grossman had a question.
Thank you, Dave. I have a couple comments and questions. First, I think, Kathy, you're right on. We have a serious problem with how our TIF and abatement system is deployed today. And Liberty and Elm is probably the most egregious example lately, where they've given away 1.5 generations of money without any return to help that community maintain its character and flavor. I find that troubling. But at the same time, we're sitting here because our city failed. They did a campaign promise and got a trust fund out there and then sat back and waited to see what happens. I think it's fundamental, as Peg pointed out, that the people who are involved and have the most at stake have to actually be brought to the table first. You have to talk it through with everybody and figure out a real plan. That is something that, frankly, government has just not been doing. And it needs to happen, because otherwise we end up right here. But I have two concerns. I mean, I think the amendment has come about because our government's left us no choice but to actually force the hand of government to do the right thing. But two concerns I have is, one is that the city may view it as a way to say, well, if we do that, we're capped. We don't have to do any more than that. And I'd hate to see us back away when we run into situations where we need to do more. The other concern I have is I want to see a blend of community, not a segmentation of community. And I get worried when I see that, well, we'll build a 24-unit building, all affordable housing. And then a few blocks away, there'll be a 24-unit building of all market rate or upscale condos or apartments. It doesn't blend and bring a diversity to the community. It's what where I would come from, call shtetls. And I don't want to see us inducing shtetls. I want to see us, as Liberty and Elm should have been. It should be a mixed community, because it's time to get past the notion that affordable housing means criminals and bad people. And so to me, the biggest thing is change and clean up our abatement system. It may have been great when it was amended before, given the need of our community, but the need has changed. But also we need to actually sit down and get the people involved. As it's been pointed out, there are private foundations that want to do this, but the city just hasn't really figured out their game. And it may well be that this amendment is the requirement. It certainly, to me, is a consequence of the city failing to carry through on its promises.
Do folks feel like the Wilkeman project in downtown and over the Rhine is a good example or not? Or are they aware of it?
Are you talking about the Elm Liberty project?
No.
Okay.
It's called Wilkeman. It's like 100 units of and 50 affordable or so. And scattered throughout over the Rhine. It's under construction now.
It's the mixed income project that 3CDC and
Right.
Model put together, and it does, to someone's question earlier, it is a huge public-private partnership. There's a lot of credits, a lot of city money, federal money, private money involved in that, and it's a big project. And it's what you should see in all communities. It's like the mixed income housing that's needed in all of our communities.
Do you know what, Kathy, do you know what percentage in terms of mixed income? Is it 30%? Is it 60? Is it 50?
At least 30. It might be a little more than that.
I think it's half.
Oh, it might be half. Yeah, it very well might be.
Great. Yay.
And I think Connie had a question from the chat. Connie?
Yeah, it was just really a clarification. Matt, I don't know if you are the best one to answer this, but I haven't seen the latest draft, and I don't know that we have the language, but in an earlier one, it did talk about 5% of the funds could be used for administration, and I'm just, that's a lot of money. So that's $2.5 million up to. So, who or what does that go for?
Yeah, that would be up to. They're certainly not required to spend it all, and that would go to pay for staff to implement the programs. It would probably go to in obviously the overhead, but the costs of hiring a few people to whether you embed them at the Department of Community and Economic Development. They'll need computers and desks and so forth. But yeah, it's up to that amount, but it is certainly not required.
So that is the money that would go to outside agencies.
Well, it is up to the oversight board whether they want to make it an outside agency or really. I mean, they could quite simply pay the Department of Community and Economic Development to staff up, add a few more people, and funnel it through there if they felt that was the most efficient and effective way of doing it.
Okay.
What about the staff or the board having the final say on what the projects are without going through the city manager? Having the staff person work for the oversight board directly rather than as a member of the Department of Development.
Yeah, I don't know the logistics of the legality of that, because if there is an issue that it has to go to the city manager, to them, once the signatures have been handed to the clerk to get them certified, and then they have to write up the official language. And obviously, if there are loopholes in there or loose ends, really, then I think they're able to clean that up between now and then. We had this. The ballot language was written by John Kerp, who was the former city solicitor. So I'm sure. I'm not a lawyer, nor do I play one on TV, but I think he's got. I would hope he wouldn't leave a loose end like that isn't easily tied up.
Rena, would you like to ask your question? And then thank you, Catherine. I'm seeing quite a focus on low-income housing tax credits. If we could, after Rena's question, focus on that, please.
Hey, David, I think you may have passed up my comment. And I got
I'm sorry.
run soon. So,
Very sorry, Eric.
Oh, no worries at all. Thank you all so much. This has been incredibly helpful as somebody with perhaps a little less experience in this world than many of you. I wanted to ask a question specifically about one of your points, Dot, about not allowing state and federal funding sources to fund the trust fund. I am an architect in town and have done you know, for my age, I guess, a fair amount of developer-driven projects, and specifically low-income housing tax credit projects. And it seems specifically when you're trying to serve the lower end, like 30% AMI, which this trust fund is trying to serve 50% of that funding. It seems like if we allow the state and federal funding to go into into the trust fund, perhaps you might be removing that source and just shifting it from one pot to the other. So long story short, I apologize for the wordy comment, but in your experience, would allowing that money or would using the trust fund money disqualify you somehow from using any other state or federal programs?
I don't see why.
Right.
I was just saying that if the goal is to spend $50 million a year, that CDBG and home money could be counted as part of that 50 million. And I think that's specifically excluded in the proposal that's on the ballot.
Yeah. And what we thought we would do is using the fund in many cases would serve to bridge gaps in funding projects that TIF or CDBG or CDC funds not fill. So that's how that would leverage with government funds.
Okay, thank you.
Somebody's asking about the Cornerstone rental equity model, which is really great, where part of a small percentage of the rent paid goes into an equity fund, basically. And after 5 years, the person who's been paying rent has some possible home down payment assistance, or they can use it to pay off a student loan, something like that. It's a wonderful program. I was delighted to learn just this last year that it's still in existence. It started out at one desk in the Better Housing League back in the early 90s. And it's a great idea to help people build equity. It's like a forced savings account. And somebody had a question in the chat about it, but it is out there. It's used in one of the projects behind St. Seraph, I think, over the Rhine. And some of the folks that are working with Mary Burke and over the Rhine Housing, I think, are using Cornerstone rental equity.
I'll just add, like all affordable housing, it needs subsidy, and they spend a large part of their time trying to raise money to do these developments. It's very gap equity intensive. That's the best way I could put it.
That math problem again.
Yeah.
So did Rena ask her question? Rena, are you on here? Because that was a good question. If the charter amendment passes, could the city fund the 50 million through bonds as described in other cities by Kathy?
So I actually asked that question. I asked that question of the people in the city, but we've used our bonding capacity almost to the max. It was explained to me that they may not be able to do a bond of that size for this project without a revenue stream. A lot of bonds have some revenue stream, and this. So, I mean, we could look to the county and the Port Authority.
Port Authority, does the Port Authority come in here someplace?
Port Authority has bonding authority.
Yes, I know that.
And they use the county's actually, balance sheet, if you will. So, yeah, I mean, the county needs to be a part of the solution as well.
Is Laura still on? Are you still on the call, Laura? Yeah.
Well, I'm just curious why the charter amendment proposal prohibited raising new taxes to raise the revenue.
Quite frankly, we felt that it would be give us a better chance of getting this passed because we can tell people we're not going to raise your taxes, and it does not prohibit the city from raising the taxes to pay for something else. It just prohibits them to raise it for this specific initiative. So if they were to, we're not advocating for this, but if they did want to rob Peter to pay Paul for this, they could.
Well, it could very well result in cuts of something else.
Right, and then this is why we have advocated for things like impact fees and raising the funds rather than robbing Peter to pay Paul.
And that is a question, Matt, that I've gotten. I know you touched on possible funding streams for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Could we all talk a little bit more about examples of funding streams that we would hope for?
Well, the three that we had suggested in there, and again, they were only suggestions, were using the railroad revenue, and in speaking with a now former council member, one thought was maybe we sell it and create a trust out of that. So the revenue you get from selling that railroad permanently funds this as a permanent funding source as it is invested. We have talked about the impact fee, and the third option was a tax on stock options. And I know that David Mann has said that is not legal in Ohio. Again, not being a lawyer, I'm going to lean on the lawyer who wrote this for us, who didn't seem to feel the same way.
Yeah, and John Kerp, in response to that question, felt that is something that, yes, it needed to be changed at the state, but it wouldn't be impossible. The other thing I want to point out is that Josh Spring and I spoke with David Mann about the charter amendment and suggested, first question is, can philanthropy, can foundations contribute as part of to make up part of the 50 million? And do you receive money that way? And he said, yes, they did. So a line item could be created in the city budget simply for revenue for Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And foundations can give us a substantial way to the trust fund that way. And that's, I think, a major contribution. What Kathy was saying about bonding, someone recommended that to me, and I said, well, who pays back? And they said, well, the city does. And I said, okay, well, that's not an option, not for the city of Cincinnati. And honestly, we can wait until hell freezes over for the city and the county to do metro government, for the city and county to cooperate on funding, just as they've been forced to do on the Metropolitan Sewer District. So we can wait and wait and wait. And affordable housing units dribble in, maybe 100 a year, maybe not even that much. So to me, there are many good policies that could be followed. So we created this policy called the Affordable Housing Trust Fund without any money in it, because the will of council wasn't there to do an oversight board or to commit to a certain amount of funding. So I just, honestly, people have been waiting for 30 years for this problem to be responded to in an adequate way. And there are many groups doing their best, but they're all very small efforts. So that's another reason we went for the charter amendment.
But the easiest thing that could be done would be to raise the millage. We're reducing the millage right now because of the increase in the county tax. And that's the 0.3 or 0.5% suggestion that perhaps that be set aside. But the city millage is very low. They could raise it 2 or 3 mills or 2.5 mills, I think. It's at 5 point something, and it could go to 6.1. And that would be the easiest and best. And people in Cincinnati seem to think that they're taxed terribly, which they are not. Cincinnati is way below Columbus and other cities in terms of taxing. And they could raise the mill and make it all go to housing. And I don't know how much that generates every year, but it would make a huge difference.
But when we suggested the 0.3 be taken to be invested into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund before the amendment happened, we were told that council already had plans for that.
But they aren't raising the millage. They're taking the reduction they could otherwise get, but they could also raise it. The other point I wanted to make that Matt suggested, if you sold the railroad, you would put it into the housing trust fund and you would not have any income coming in to pay it back or to continue to generate money. It would just be used like grocery money. I mean, I was very upset the way they handled the Blue Ash Airport. They didn't come up with anything that was comparable as a program or anything else that money could have gone for, and we just ate it like grocery money. And it doesn't make sense to me, and I don't see how they could, if they put that money in from the railroad, if they sold the railroad, which I'd be absolutely against, just because I think we wouldn't use it wisely, and it wouldn't replenish itself if you put it into the housing trust fund.
The idea would be to invest it, so it would be a trust.
Oh, okay. It would be a real trust.
It'd be an
Okay.
endowment, yeah, basically.
Okay.
Yeah, that was really spitballing an idea, and not mine, of former council members.
I apologize if I'm missing any questions before Janet's, but I think, Janet, do you want to ask your question, please?
Sure. I was just listening in the chat. There was some conversation about, will this actually be on the ballot? And it looks like you've turned in double the amount of petitions. So I think we all need to, we've heard pros and cons, and truthfully, Dot, I agree with you completely that I wish this was not a charter amendment. But the question we have before us is, do we support it or do we not? We have a binary choice to make. And my question is, if we decide for whatever reasons of conscience that we don't want to vote for it, then what would be the next step? What would we do next to try to make affordable housing happen?
I think the biggest thing is who you elect to council.
Mm-hmm.
You've got some folks, and Jan Michelle is coming up with a couple of ideas all the time. She passed some ordinance last week. I don't know exactly what it is, but we've got people like Michelle Dillingham and others who are actively supporting this. And I think that we ought to be challenging every candidate and get the people on council who will make some of these other ordinances and other things happen, like the millage rate or something else as a substitute. And I do think that the whole political atmosphere is changing in regard to the importance of housing and what it means for poverty in general, and particularly for the children. I do think that we are, thanks to the Black Lives Matter and the demonstrations over the last 10 months, I guess, have made a difference. And I'm hoping that people will put it up there on the top priority. But if the city made it a top priority, and the mayor and council said to the city manager, you're going to fund housing one way or the other, they'll figure it out.
I mean,
That's what we want, yeah.
the reason that we have taken the drastic measure of a charter amendment is because nobody has been stepping up to do that. We would be more than happy to see somebody to see council or philanthropy or a combination thereof, business, to come forward and say, okay, we have a plan right now. We really mean it. And it's not something that will, as soon as we give it to you next year, we'll say, it was only a pilot program, forget it. We're not doing that anymore. It's got to be something that sticks. I'd be happy to go away in favor of something else. It doesn't have to be a charter amendment, but we've waited long enough and we haven't gotten anything to hang our hats on so far. So we've decided we're going to build a hat rack.
So, good metaphor. So the Elm and Liberty project, all the city council members that are coming up currently with housing plans, affordable housing plans, that was 80% of the county median income that they all supported. There was a push by over the Rhine community housing and other housing advocates to lower it to 30% or at least 50% or 60%, which is where 41% of people who need help on housing are. And council, all of council did not do that. So to say, if we had a council and things are changing, I hope they change too, but you know, when you're in need, you can't always rely on potential changes. And that, I mean, I'm not sure that any of those proposals that are being offered now in city council would have happened had the community not gotten behind this. So we have 9,500 signatures for the charter amendment.
Right.
Beth, did you have any more to your question about housing our future?
Oh, I just wondered, since this is all of the strategies for affordable housing have been very well thought out in the Housing Our Future plan, what was the reaction of city council to that plan?
They've all seen that plan, right, Kathy? And they think it's a great plan, but nobody stepped up to say, okay, we have a way to fund it.
It's something that we can advocate for now.
So interesting. We did a very brief presentation to city council because it was COVID and like we were on Zoom and like I don't know. I think it was just too overwhelming for everybody. I think we have to like educate individual council members, which we've been doing. I know Kristen's been like making the circuit with all the different council members. But I will say, I have to give the county a lot of credit because we did this with the county commissioners. Every single one of them said, we will adopt this. We will take this to heart. We need this in our counties, in our jurisdictions in the county. So they were all over it. And still to this day, I think I just spoke earlier with Joy Pearson, who said, you know, they're dedicating some funding. I mean, it's not a lot because it's the county. They don't have what the city has in the way of block grant money, but they're dedicating money to like affordable issues around housing. And I think it's commendable that the county's doing this.
We would probably end our event on time, but we designated at 8, but we're really appreciative of the quality of this discussion and the deliberative ideas here. So I want to offer a little time and space for anyone with us tonight that hasn't had a chance to speak, or maybe you've thought of a question now.
This is James Buchanan. In 2019, the City Council approved 15 TIF districts. What role can TIFs play in this whole conundrum of affordable housing?
Of course, TIFs are restricted to their district. Then I believe it's a 300-acre maximum. And so they are one of the great difficulties with the TIF. I mean, I've worked with them and they've done some wonderful things. But one of the great difficulties is you need a revenue generator there. And if we're talking about areas that really need something that, you know, that'll kick things off, they start at a disadvantage. It's a great tool in some spaces, but it's restricted to certain areas. And I know that City Hall has sort of waffled on whether or not they like the idea.
I know that Portland has used it to create about $250 million in affordable housing. I wonder if the model out there, if we brought that to City Council, I mean, it's a matter of them changing the rules of the way they set the things up, as opposed to, I know we've got the 15 districts, but there's their choice to set it up that way.
I think they have some of the restrictions of how the state allows them to do it. And one of the things that I have seen so much is you set up a TIF district, then you get a developer who swoops in and says, all right, here we go. There's my money. And then they want to set up a project-based TIF inside of the district TIF. And then all of a sudden, all that money's not only captured there, but it's captured only on their footprint. And then the community says, hey, wait a minute, isn't this our money? And they say, well, hey, wait a minute, don't you want this project? And then, yeah, I mean, I've seen some pretty ugly stuff. Recently came from a situation where we said, okay, wow, our neighborhood is kind of on fire here. We better wall off all of these ideas for what we want to do with TIF money now before somebody else comes in and says, hey, you know what I should do with this TIF money? And we want to say, no, here's what the neighborhood wants to do with it, because city council in the end decides on what gets done with it. So you better get your thumb in the pie first.
Other thoughts or questions from folks that haven't spoken?
I just wanted to make sure everybody saw the chat that Rena put in on March 31st. There will be a mayoral primary candidate forum. Women's City Club and about 10 other groups are putting that on. And that will be focused on just two subjects, affordable housing and racial equity. So there definitely will be questions on this.
Oh, yeah.
David,
Yes.
can I just leave with one fact?
Yes.
Currently, in our emergency shelter system in the city of Cincinnati, 74% of the people who are currently there are African American. So when you talk about this issue of funding, you're also talking about really getting at the foundation of systemic racism. And I believe, and I know Mark believes, that we can't wait any longer on this.
Thank you, Peg.
It's a tough choice. It's a really tough choice.
Yes.
I think it's important to pause and just reflect for a moment. Other thoughts?
Well, I do think and thank the people behind this charter amendment for bringing the issue to the forefront, because whether it passes or fails, it has gotten attention and helped us educate everybody about this issue. So it's been very valuable.
Speaking of educating people, we have had an opportunity to speak with Greg Johnson from CMHA. After speaking with him, your paradigm about affordable housing changes. And I'm just wondering if he's ever been invited to speak before City Council about what affordable housing really is, what that is in Cincinnati, that it's not putting 3 apartments in a 20-unit building where the top rents are $1,500, and now the 3 quote affordable units are still at $1,200 a month. We're talking about people whose income is not even at the basic poverty level. We're talking about people that are living at 175% below the poverty level. They're the ones that need affordable housing. So I just thought, I don't know if any of you have contact with Greg. He is wonderful at helping to educate people.
And the fact that there's 2,000 people on the waiting list for vouchers and for other subsidized housing, and the waiting list is closed because it's full.
Right. In fact, right now, I have two neighbors. They both have vouchers. They cannot find places to rent or places that will take the housing choice vouchers. And we're talking about people who have, one person in particular has 8 children she's responsible for. It's tough. But I don't think that the definition of affordable housing is understood by the majority of the people in this community.
Nor is the definition of poverty.
Of poverty either, correct?
You're absolutely right, Aggie.
Other thoughts or questions?
And I'd say thanks to everybody for hanging in there. It's been a good discussion.
Yes, thank you all for joining us this evening. And thank you, Jeff. He's listed the upcoming Woman City Club events in our chat. And if you do want to continue with this kind of civic education and deliberative dialogue, listening and hearing from others, please consider joining the Woman City Club, and I'll put a link to our membership page here. And do take a look at our upcoming events, including our the coalition that's formed for the mayoral candidate forum coming up, as Susan mentioned.
This has been great. Yeah. Terrific.
All right. So yes, thank you, Janet. So I believe with that, and thank you, Beth.
Thank you, everybody.
Everyone. Yes.
Yeah, thank you to our speakers. Our speakers were just all excellent. Appreciate it so much.